Texas Small Farmers and Ranchers CBO.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight for tonight's Knowledge Forum, which is unlocking your solar opportunities on your land. Hosted or presented actually by our special guests at American Farmland Trust. And a few things before we get too deep in the weeds. Of course, we have our panel of hosts here. Uche Ogba and Arlena Brumfield. And also, real quick, before we get too deep in the weeds, we always like to do a little housekeeping. One item is that everyone is muted, so we don't have too much background noise, but we do encourage you to, throughout the night, to use the chat. We will be doing, at the end of our presentation, a Q&A session. So during the presentation, if there's any questions that come up, please feel free to use your Q&A section at the bottom of your screen there. Just type in any questions, and Uche or myself or even Arlena will jump in and try to tend to those. And last but certainly not least, we will be sending out a recording. So if you have to kind of step away from the presentation and come back, please don't feel like you've missed much. We're going to get something out to you within the next week or so. So with that said, Uche, I'm going to pass it on to you and see if you have any icebreakers for us.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you, Phil. I appreciate the introduction. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our monthly knowledge forum. I'm very excited to have all of you here. I already see 12 of y'all. Okay, one person drop out. 11 of y'all on as attendees. I'm sure more people will join us as the time goes on. But like we always do, every one of our knowledge forums, we always start with an icebreaker. So I'm going to make it a little easier for everyone right now. We have 3 questions in this icebreaker poll question. Feel free to answer them. And I'll give everybody about 3 minutes, 2 minutes maybe, but I think it's pretty easy for everyone to answer them. So the questions are pretty much simple. The first one is, where are you joining us from? I always say it's always exciting to learn and see where people are joining us from. We've had people from all over, so please feel free to respond. It's just a short answer. And the second question is, what do you produce or hope to produce on your farm as a ranch? We've always asked this question every single time. Like, what are you producing? What do you plan to produce? If you don't plan to have anything, put something down. When I first started with Texas Small Farmers and Ranchers, I wasn't big of a producer. Now I got my herb garden and everything. I'm feeling all green thumb. So see, we try to manifest it, and from there we move forward. And of course, the third question is for our ranchers. What type of livestock do you raise or hope to raise on your farm or ranch? We've had plenty of webinars about livestock, whether it's the small livestock from rabbits, small chickens like Arlena's got. I know she got her chickens. They're growing pretty strong, or large cattle. It doesn't matter. We would love to learn more about what you plan to do. So we've had some answers come in already. We're only a minute, 16 seconds in, y'all. So please respond. I'm only providing 2 minutes. I'm going to shorten it down. But please, please, please share your information, share your thoughts, or you could even put it in the chat itself. We would love to hear from you. If you don't want to use the post function, that's okay. The chat works just fine, and you get to meet other people from your area or close to you. You never know. So let's see where we are. 44 minute 45, 15 seconds left, y'all. I see 15 of y'all in the as attendees. I hope to get everyone's participation. I only see 8 people participating. Come on now. Y'all got to do me a favor and help me out here. All right. I have 110 people. Okay, 2 minutes over. I'm gonna shut it down. All right, let me see. I'm gonna view these results real quick. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, we got some people on here. Ah, okay. Someone's from Seguin, Texas. Welcome. Cincinnati, Houston, Allen, Texas, Atkins, Texas, outside of San Antonio. Okay, I'm in San Antonio too. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Fort Worth, Denver, Colorado. Okay, welcome. Santa Clara, California. Okay. Lancaster, all right, and Houston. Wow, we got a good group of people from all over. Thank you for joining us. Now, we have some people who provide answers on what they're producing or hope to produce on their farm. Someone said vegetables, cut flowers, lavender, eggs, cattle. I love that. See, from vegetables all the way to large scale livestock. I love that. Someone says solar energy. I love that enthusiasm already. We have folks already in here for the solar energy conversation. We have unknown. Oh no, oh, unknown is not right. Well, we hope to convince you today to do something with your land, whether it is having some sort of vegetable growth, cattle, or some sort of livestock, or solar energy, like our previous person said. Someone said, I currently have a variety of fruit trees and bushes. I also grow seasonal veggies. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. Another guest, chemical-free future. Bees You Picket Farm. Oh, that sounds interesting. Okay, I like that. I like that. Another guest said solar, wind, and storage. There you go. They said we are all in for solar and wind. We have some guests today for you, Sarah and Garrett. It should be exciting. Another guest said learn about solar energy. Welcome, you're in the right place. Another guest, fruits and vegetables. And another guest said considering solar or rough stock. Interesting. We might be able to answer a few of those questions today. And in terms of livestock, someone said vegetables and eggs. I'm guessing you probably have some chickens running around. Someone said not applicable. Someone said none. Someone said no livestock at this time, but would love chickens. Okay. Someone said chickens had future chickens, sheep. Okay. Someone said goats and bees. I like me some bees. We had a knowledge forum previously where we had an actual beekeeper, and he was interesting to have a conversation with. Someone said chickens again. Someone said the property's leased. I can see the drawback when it comes to lease, but there's certain things you can go around that. We have another knowledge forum that can answer some of those questions about lease property and how to have livestock on it. Another guest said working on this. LOL. We understand. And another guest said horses and bulls. So it seems like we have a good array of guests today. And a lot of them are leaning towards solar energy because that's what our conversation is about, Phil, right? Like we are talking about all things solar energy. So, Figure Eight, I'll pass it back to you.
All right. Very, very popular topic, one of our most popular topics so far. So, and I forgot to mention a little bit about our organization, Texas Small Farmers and Ranchers, community-based organization. We're a non-membership nonprofit with really a mission of supporting you as a grower, of your own fresh food. Also, we are here to help create avenues to monetize your land in ways such as solar. So, with that said, I do want to say a little bit high level of our special guests. I'm not going to dive too deep in there. Garrett and Sarah, I'm going to let y'all kind of do a little if you want to go deeper, but we're going to introduce Garrett Botter. He is a solar specialist with American Farmland Trust, and Garrett provides strategic support to farmers and landowners exploring sustainable energy solutions. He focuses on helping landowners like you and I implement smart solar practices that balance agricultural production and energy generation on the same land. So Garrett has robust background in renewable energy development and environmental conservation, making him a valuable resource for sustainable agricultural practices. So glad to have you with us, Garrett. And also, we have Sarah Fulton Smith, and Sarah is a leading voice in sustainable land management and solar integration with American Farmland Trust. She works closely with agricultural communities, guiding landowners through solar energy adoption and supporting them with policy and advocacy. So, Sarah's expertise includes navigating solar leasing agreements and ensuring farmers maximize the benefits of solar energy while maintaining productive land use. So, with that said, I'm going to give y'all the floor, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, there we go. How long is it going to take me to get off mute? Thank you so much for having us. We're really excited to be here. Thank you for the introductions. I will do my best to maintain Uche's energy level, but I don't know if I have that in me, so we'll see how it goes. I didn't get to fill out the icebreaker, so I was just going to say I'm in Denton and I raise sheep and chickens and horses. And then for our family, we have a nice big veggie patch and herbs and all that good stuff. So anyway, Garrett and I are more than happy to be here to talk to you about solar energy today. P. Wade may have oversold my solar expertise. I'm directing the Texas program, so I am working on all of our regenerative agriculture projects. I have a background in soil science, but I am very passionate about our ability to integrate solar energy into the agriculture community and the opportunity that it presents for our farmers and ranchers in Texas. I'm a 7th generation Texan, and I feel very strongly that we need these like win-win solutions for agriculture here. That said, I'm going to start out by introducing American Farmland Trust a little bit more. Some of you might be hearing about us for the first time, and just give a really brief overview of our organization, the work that we're doing in Texas, and then, you know, explain why is a farm organization getting into this solar energy space. Garrett is going to introduce our smart solar work at American Farmland Trust, and that really just explains our approach to doing solar right. So that it's complementary to agriculture and to conserving natural resources while also producing renewable energy. He's going to introduce the different scales of solar energy, some of the challenges and opportunities that energy may present to you, and how that can impact your farm viability. And then, of course, at the end, we'll have plenty of time for questions. So, like I said, before we jump into a conversation about solar, I just want to briefly introduce you to AFT. AFT is a national level nonprofit organization that was started by farmers, ranchers, and conservationists in 1980. We are the only national scale land trust that's focused on protecting agricultural land. The organization was started really with a fundamental belief that farmers and ranchers and the land that they manage are vital to the health and well-being of Americans and of our planet. And really, that farmers are at the core of our mission. Farmers are the best stewards of their own land, and they can be a part of the solution to the environmental challenges that we are facing rather than being blamed for anything that's happening. Go ahead for the next slide, Garrett. So our mission is to save the land that sustains us. And we advance our mission by pursuing 3 equal and interconnected goals. They're like 3 legs to 1 stool. Without 1 leg, the stool falls over, right? So that's protecting farmland, promoting sound practices, sound farming practices. We think that that integrated approach is really important to actually being able to achieve the mission of saving the land that sustains us. I just got something pop up that said my connection is unstable. Can y'all hear me okay? Okay. So as we say at AFT, we're focused on the land, the practices, and the people, and that all of those are essential to all farms and ranches, providing our society with fundamental ecosystem services. Go ahead, Garrett, with the. So that's some of those include rural prosperity, health and equitable food systems, climate resilient, clean water and healthy soil, food security, and wildlife habitat. So we do have programs all over the country. We have multiple national initiatives. I could give a whole separate webinar for 3 hours on all of the different work that AFT does. But in Texas, our 2022 Farms Under Threat report identified that Texas will lose more agricultural land than any other state. We're expected to lose 2.2 million acres of agricultural land by 2040. And actually, of the top 12 counties in the whole country that are expected to lose the most ag land, 8 of those counties are in Texas. So these land use changes will lead to a significant amount of loss, not just of the land, but of almost 12,000 farms, almost $500 million in farm output, and over 26,000 jobs. So these impacts are not just on the agricultural land, they're on the whole farming community. And also what we see is that when we lose farms and ranches and the ability of those farms and ranches to produce food, that means that we now have pressure to produce more food on even less land with less environmental impact. And that puts more pressure on our natural habitat and our wildlife habitat that might then be converted into agriculture to make up for that loss of ag lands to rural development. So it really is a domino effect cascade that can happen. Go ahead with the map. So this map shows, it's kind of hard to see, but the red areas are the projected areas of land loss by 2040. And you can see that that's mostly centered around major cities where a lot of our most productive agricultural lands are. And this map also, I just want to point out, does not include land that might end up under solar energy production. So I'll touch on that more in a second. Go ahead and advance to the next slide. So while protecting farmland is a really critical part of our mission, we are a land trust. A lot of people expect that land protection easements, that's most of what we do, but that's really only a piece of our mission. We work on those other 2 pillars equally, the promoting sound farming practices and keeping farmers on the land. In Texas, our primary goal with all of our programs is to increase the resilience of farmland and ranch land, and then therefore also increase the resilience of the farmers and ranchers that steward those lands and supporting their surrounding communities. Our approach is that if farms and ranches are more resilient, productive, and profitable, they're also more likely to stay in agriculture. So we really see that supporting the farmer in being profitable and staying in business is key to keeping land in agriculture. And so our 4 main program areas are increasing the adoption of conservation practices, promoting regenerative grazing. We have a regenerative grazing mentorship program that we're launching now. We have a farm transfer and succession planning program where we're helping farmers transition their land to the next generation to make sure that it stays in agriculture, whether that next generation is within their family or it's connecting them to somebody that's interested in getting into agriculture but doesn't have that legacy to inherit the land. And then, of course, advancing smart solar, which we're going to talk to you guys about a lot more today. So at the same time that our ag lands in Texas are more threatened than ever before, solar energy is growing rapidly. This graph just shows Texas at the top of renewable energy production compared to all other states. At this point, we even have more installed solar capacity than California, and that's expected to double, I think, in the next 5 years, which is, I mean, that's crazy. The Department of Energy has estimated that 10 million acres are needed for renewable energy. 10 million acres of land are needed to achieve our renewable energy goals. And AFT projected that 80% of that will be on ag lands. If you think about it, agricultural lands are primed for solar development. They're typically not always flat, but they're relatively level. They have road access and they're clear of trees and all of these things. So this amount of solar energy development will really be a landscape scale change that will have a really big impact on our rural communities in Texas. And despite all of this, AFT is not opposed to solar energy development. We really see it as an opportunity. We know that there is a pathway for this change to happen in a manner that will support farms and ranches and rural communities, that solar can be done well and be respectful of natural resources, and that it can create opportunities for farm families and ranchers to build businesses, build generational viability, and keep land in agriculture. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Garrett, who's going to go into more detail about the different types of solar and how you might be able to engage. Garrett, we can't hear you.
I have to unmute. Hey, thank you, Sarah, for that introduction, and P-Wade also for having us. Love seeing all the beekeepers out there. I also have bees and solar on my house, so love to share kind of what we're, trying to promote here at AFT. Before we dive in, I wanted to take a minute real quick and hear about the perception of solar energy in Texas. If Chad, we can post that first poll.
The poll is posted, so we have some questions, answers coming in already. So far everything's leaning positive. We do have one negative. Oh, so someone does have a negative field perception. No opinion. We have two no opinions. So I know we have 28 people on our conversation, so I would love to get everyone's feedback. For the next 30 seconds, we'll keep the poll open. So please share what your perception is of solar energy in Texas. So we have a majority positive so far, majority positive. All right. All right, we're going away, guys. 10 seconds. And it is going to be shut down in 3, 2, 1. Okay. So I'm sharing results so far. We have 15 people shared that they have a positive experience or perception of solar energy in Texas, Garrett. 3 people shared they have no opinion, and 2 people have a negative perception of solar energy in Texas. I hope that helps.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. Thank y'all for sharing. I mean, as an organization founded to protect farmland from development, answering questions of how and whether to put renewable energy installations on food-producing farmland is not easy, but it is necessary, especially with this growth of solar here in Texas. AFT is pro-farmer first and committed to educating farmers about the options available to utilize solar development as a long-term strategy to keep land in ag and build farm viability. To help guide this solar development in a way that maximizes benefits to farming communities, AFT, we launched our Smart Solar Initiative in 2021, really with 3 equally important goals in mind. These were to safeguard land well suited for farming and ranching, strengthen farm viability, and accelerate solar energy development. We understand that, our nation, we need both renewable energy and thriving farms. So at AFT, we really think that smart solar can be the solution. What is smart solar? So, we developed 4 principles to guide this build out, with the first being prioritizing solar siting on buildings, land not well suited for farming. This means emphasizing solar energy on rooftops, putting it on carports, brownfields, just other land not well suited for ag, to help minimize those impacts of solar energy on the best ag land and farm businesses. Second is safeguarding the ability for land to be used for agriculture if solar is installed on farmland. We need policies, practices to protect soil health, ensure future access to water, especially during those different phases, the construction and decommissioning phases, to ensure opportunities for farming in the future. The third one is agrivoltaics, which is the co-location of both agriculture production and solar energy generation on the same piece of land. We think that this is a great opportunity to grow agrivoltaics, and we think that both can coexist if appropriate planning is undertaken. And the fourth one is promoting equity and farm viability. Farmers and underserved communities should benefit from solar energy development. There needs to be inclusive stakeholder engagement to ensure projects strengthen farm viability and reflect farmers' interest, including underserved producers that face barriers to accessing land and other resources. We do understand that these will look different around the country, but believe these are good guiding principles. So I wanted to start out describing the solar build out and the different scales and classifications that are out there. This figure on the left shows growth over time in the type of solar installation. You can see a huge increase in utility scale solar in the light blue since 2000, and a huge acceleration after 2016 which Sarah mentioned our farms under threat analysis. That's the deadline of our data that we used. Government incentives and lower costs due to economies of scale will only continue this increase. And utility scale solar is expected to account for about 2/3 of global capacity by 2050. So the bulk of this build out is going to be these large systems. It's helpful to note that within these different scales, there are different market structures, different incentives, siting and grid interconnection requirements, and also opportunities and challenges. So I'll go through these more in depth, but it's important to understand that there are two main buckets that these four scales fall into. Your front of the meter, which comprises the larger utility and community scale projects that are for off-farm use or consumption. And behind the meter systems such as commercial, residential, that are generating power for on-site use. So takeaway from this slide is really just that growth in solar, specifically utility scale, and that the land impact increases as we move from residential to utility scale installations. And just to give you an idea of what this looks like in Texas, similarly, vast majority of this solar build out has been utility scale. Like Sarah mentioned, we do lead the nation as far as the amount of utility scale solar that we have. And we've seen a 10-fold increase since 2019 and no slowdown in sight. So diving in to some of those terms I just used, those two buckets. Front of the meter, these are, like I said, those two bigger scales, the utility, the community. They're providing power to offsite locations. They might be located on your farm, but they are sending that electricity back to the grid and they are generating it for sale. Mostly utilities, large power purchasers like Amazon, Google, Facebook, they're buying this electricity from these front of the meter off-farm systems. The other one is the behind the meter. This is that commercial, residential, those smaller scales, and generating electricity for on-site consumption. So it's on farm, you're using it there. Some of it might get sent back to the grid, could be sold back, but the bulk of that is going to be used on site. And some other terms, real quick, just to use to indicate the size of a solar system. All panels have different wattages. So it's a little difficult to compare if you're just saying, oh, I've got 20 panels and I've got 25, just because of these differences. Average residential panels are on the smaller side, usually 250 to 400 watts. Commercial to utility scale panels are bigger, so maybe 500 to 600 watts. So really when comparing, it's best to use kilowatt or megawatt. Kilowatt is going to be used on the smaller commercial residential scale. It's 1,000 watts. The median size system on a Texas home for residential use is 7.4 kilowatts. Once you get up into the bigger community utility scale systems, you're going to start hearing a lot of megawatts. 1 megawatt can power about 120 homes here in Texas. So, looking at that, 100 megawatt utility scale farm might cover 12,000 Texas homes. You can also see the acreage that is affected. With 1 megawatt, it ranges from about 4 to 10 acres, just depending on system design and the land use and things like that. And 2 examples in these pictures, you can see one on-farm commercial system on a roof mount, 24 kilowatts. And then you've got that bigger solar farm. It could be a community site or a utility site. But this is now over 4,200 panels. So you're into the megawatts, so 2.436 megawatts. So just to kind of get an idea of when you hear these electrical terms thrown around. Agrivoltaics is a very popular term now and is growing in use. Agri-solar, dual use are other terms being used. Basically agriculture, voltaics, photovoltaics, or solar. That's how we came up with that, or that's how the word was originated. But they are projects that sustain ag production underneath solar panels and or between rows of solar panels throughout the life of the project. That's our third smart solar principle. It's growing agrivoltaics. We think it can be a solution in many of these large utility and community solar installations, and a tremendous opportunity for farmer entrepreneurs to take advantage of this industry by either expanding or starting new grazing businesses. Using sheep for vegetation management is the most common agrivoltaic practice being used here in Texas and around the country, since there really aren't many design changes needed on the solar installation. They're not like goats jumping up on the panels, chewing on wires. So they're extremely common here. And really vegetation on these sites must be maintained. So shading is prevented, ensuring the system is working efficiently, and to reduce fire risk. So mowing, spraying chemicals, is very common, but using sheep is gaining, and even more common. It's called solar grazing. You'll hear that term, and it's becoming quite popular. So increasing the height for other animals like cattle, it's going to take more steel, and therefore, it's going to be more expensive. So that's why, a lot of that sweet spot at that moment for grazing is in the sheep. There does continue to be a lot of research being done on the compatibility of different crops with a range of solar panel designs. So, it shows a lot of promise, could benefit from, more research, investment, and other incentives for, these other crop applications. UT Rio Grande Valley has a research project going on right now that they're going to be studying, different crops and designs so that we can determine what works well in that region. AgriSolar Clearinghouse is another great example of an organization that's aggregating a lot of these case studies and a lot of these examples from around the country that you can actually download and pull from. So just to give you an idea of the growth of agrivoltaics around the country. Still small. I'd say roughly 10% of solar sites utilize agrivoltaics, with the vast majority being sheep grazing. For context, when we're talking about agrivoltaics and grazing, this is only happening on these larger utility and many community scale solar sites. So, I've talked a lot about different scales of solar. I want to go over each in a little more detail and mention both those opportunities and challenges. So, jumping to utility scale, the most prevalent, it is the most land intensive. Technical definition is greater than 2 megawatts, but in Texas, we see much larger systems than that. Early on, 2010, some of these community solar sites popping up, less than 50 megawatts was common. Now most are over 100. One example here in Texas, northeast of Dallas, is a site. It's 5 separate sites, all one project that takes up 18,000 acres and is 1,300 megawatts. So a massive system. Energy is being produced for off-farm use, is being bought by several companies, like Texas A&M, Home Depot, Utility, BTU, Honda, McDonald's, and others. So community scale solar, much smaller, 500 kilowatts to 5 megawatts. So generally ranging from about 15 to 50 acres. Community scale does create opportunities for low-income communities and renters to participate in and benefit from solar generation. On these sites, they might be able to buy one panel at a time or opt into a subscription program. Unfortunately, community scale solar is not as widespread here in Texas compared to other states around the country. This is mostly due to our competitive market system. The majority of community sites that are here, that you do see, are with electrical co-ops or city-owned utilities. As you can see from this map, here are a few examples kind of spread around Texas. So looking at opportunities and challenges for both of these large-scale applications, landowners with properties in ideal locations and sufficient acreage, usually 100 plus, can benefit from lease payments by hosting solar developments. However, the proximity to interconnection where they're gonna access the grid is super important, as longer distances do increase cost and complexity for solar companies. So due to those interconnection points, large-scale solar developments often cluster together, as seen on that map. You can see the early operating sites in yellow, those in orange are in development, and those under construction are in red. You can also compare the size of the developments by the size of the circles, and you can see how they're becoming larger, like I mentioned. And this map is on the Solar Energy Industry Association's website, or SEIA's. So because of how critical interconnection is, the concentrated conversion around these points can create challenges for these local communities if ag land is taken out of production on a large scale. So this is why, AFT is very focused in this space, and why agrivoltaics is such an important piece to it. So negotiating solar leases can be complex and challenging, especially with 30-year commitments. So landowners that are in these situations need to ensure that those terms align with their long-term goals. Some of the projects are also started by one company, then they're built by another, then they're sold off to another. So it's important that what's in the contract is what you want. So getting that language in there that gives you maybe the ability to continue to farm, or even to be the first to provide vegetation management services, could give you more control and buy-in during this long-term lease. And resources are becoming more available to help guide landowners through this process. And we at AFT we've developed some leasing guides in other regions, and plan to adapt one for Texas. And these can help with, what questions a landowner should be thinking about, what should they be asking a developer, and even when to consult, with an attorney. So if you're interested in these opportunities, or you've been approached by a solar developer, please don't hesitate, reach out if you'd like to get some more information. Another really important opportunity I mentioned earlier is to provide vegetation management services on these large utility scale sites. It is different than grazing, your flock on your home ranch. It is a service that you're providing and specific requirements that you must follow. However, not only would you get paid to graze on these sites, but it's a great way to gain access to land. The American Solar Grazing Association is a great organization to be a member of if interested in this. They have regular webinars, and becoming a member, you can put your information on the map to the right for developers looking for grazers in a particular area. They also release training standards that programs can follow, and after completion, you get an actual ASGA certification, and you can actually see the little sheep symbols around Texas that are certified solar grazers. One of the challenges, though, with this is it can be difficult to break into the industry and get on that first site. A lot of solar developers are still hesitant to allow access to sites, much less hundreds of animals. Many still are using mowers, but we are seeing an increased acceptance of using sheep just because of the cost savings and community benefits. So this is where ASGA and training programs can be a great way to network and even partner up with some of the solar grazers that are currently doing it. And one example, just to highlight, J.R. Howard, him and his family own Texas Solar Sheep. Solar provided access to land for him, and just an opportunity that he seized. And 2021, he had 300 sheep on his home farm. 3 years later, how it's taken off here in Texas, he's grazing over 6,000 megawatts, which I don't know the acreage exact, but if we go by even just that conservative 4 acres a megawatt, that's 24,000 acres and over 15,000 sheep. So a lot of grazers are taking advantage of this, this build out to provide these services. So Uche, I would love to, before talking about commercial, more on-farm solar opportunities, if we can ask that question about solar energy on your farm or ranch.
Of course, we can definitely do that. So I have another poll for everyone, and we're going to launch this. Hopefully it launches for me. Oh. Give me 1 second. I don't know what's happening. Okay.
We can always poll at the end too, if that works easier.
No, I figured it out. There we go. So everyone, we have another poll for you. And the question is, have you considered solar opportunities on your farm? So I know a number of people already said they're considering solar opportunities. So this is your opportunity to share directly with our guests. And the answers are coming in. We already have 12 people saying yes, and 1 person saying no, 13 people saying yes. So I'm going to give everybody about another 30 seconds. Feel free to share with us. We want to know if you've considered solar on your property, and this will help us gauge how best we can assist everyone. And the people who have not considered it, we hope to convince you by the end of this knowledge forum. Okay, we have 21 people have responded, and we have about 5 seconds left. And I will stop it now. So, based on the poll question. We have 21 people have said yes, they've considered solar opportunities on their farm, while one person has said no. To that one person, we hope to change your mind. Back to you,
Awesome.
Garrett.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Um, yeah, so commercial on-farm solar, right? So, these are the behind the meter type systems that we mentioned earlier. Typically less than 250 kilowatts, which if you're putting that on the ground, probably less than an acre. So generally, small businesses are installing solar on site, could be on a roof, over a parking lot, other type of small ground mount. For our purposes, we're going to talk about opportunities for farm businesses, and like with the increased costs for most things, installing solar could make your electricity expenses the exception, right? So installing solar for your business, reduce your rising energy cost or just offset it completely. It might take up very little of your expenses, but if you have maybe irrigation needs, heating and cooling, maybe you've got processing equipment, could be quite substantial. So you could possibly earn some revenue from excess power, but again, this depends on your utility and what type of buyback program they have, if at all. And just keep in mind, that behind the meter systems, the vast majority should be used on site. These days here in Texas, energy independence is also gaining a lot of importance, due to extreme weather. Having solar, you are going to be less dependent on the grid. However, in a grid power outage, your system will be disconnected for safety reasons and will not generate power even if the sun is shining. There are newer technologies to create kind of a grid, like a off-grid type system. But the most trustworthy or dependable would be using batteries or generators for backup power in these situations. With that, you have to weigh the economics since batteries are still a little expensive and where you live might not have that many outages or disruptions. But on the other hand, if you have refrigeration needs and can't afford to lose power, batteries could be more enticing. Government incentives and tax benefits are also huge opportunities right now, especially for ag producers. One of those is the USDA Rural Energy for America program. There is a 50% cost share or a grant for your solar system. There's also other, geothermal, wind, other type systems that apply to this, even energy efficiency measures that you can also do and take advantage of this grant program through them. There is also loan guarantees on loans for this type of equipment, up to 75% of total eligible project cost. If you're going to combine both grant and loan, then they can guarantee funding up to 75% of that total eligible cost. So who can apply? Any ag producer with at least 50% of your gross income coming from ag operations. If you're a small business in one of these eligible rural areas, you're also eligible for that. So there's a map on their website that you can look to make sure that you're in one of these rural areas. If you're a small business, if you're an ag producer, it doesn't matter, just as long as that, gross income is above 50%. It is a competitive application process, so you can look at some of the criteria here on the right. I'll go over a couple of these here in a little bit. Yeah, quarterly submission deadlines. And this 50% was increased with the Inflation Reduction Act to 25%. So it is actually a lot more than it had been in the past. If maybe you looked at it 5 years ago, I would definitely reconsider, especially when it pertains to solar. So who can help with REAP applications? If you need help, Texas A&M Kingsville has actually funding for a program that can write these grants, they can actually do energy audits as well to see, if you can improve any energy efficiency and include that into the grant application. West Texas A&M also got a grant to provide similar assistance. Both can, provide analysis. They can help understand and even model the economics and the size of your system depending on the utility and your needs. Solar United Neighbors is also a nonprofit, has great online resources for going solar. And some solar developers will often assist as well in that REAP application process. So one of the kind of turning to some of the challenges with on-farm solar is, could be competition for the land, right? If you don't have good roof space, maybe limited acreage, is installing a ground mount a good way to go? You can make it agrivoltaics and grow crops underneath. The only downside is, it would be more expensive because of that increased amount of steel, maybe less expertise or support available, at this time for those type agrivoltaic systems. Also keep in mind that REAP is a competitive process with a scorecard. So the more expensive a project, so if you're doing a ground mount or you're putting in a battery, that's going to make this payback period longer, and it's going to lower your score you receive on your REAP application. So you're going to be less competitive with some other applicants. One of the challenges is providing proof of matching funds if you're only applying for the grant portion. So, if you don't have, the money in your account, you'd have to show proof you can qualify for that financing. And one of the issues with that financing is, while there are these government incentives available, you might need to pay the solar company once the project is completed and before those incentives become available to you. So getting qualified for the whole amount, while other incentives come in, could be difficult depending on how large of a system you need. And if you don't have big irrigation pumps, and things like that, or like a lot of dairies that need massive systems, it might not be as much as you think. So there are some finance companies that do take all this into account. They see, hey, you were awarded the REAP application, these tax credits, but just that timing can be complicated for some producers, especially if you have to qualify for that entire amount. Variation in utility rules when it comes to solar can also be a challenge. So be sure to, your utilities rules. I'll talk about this here a little bit more on the same side as the tax credits, because those also can be a little bit of a challenge sometimes for businesses and homeowners. So just a few quick examples on farm solar. The first one here on the left is a ground mount on a dry edge of an irrigated field, helping to offset, some irrigation costs. This is a much bigger system. Poultry farm as well, here on the bottom right. And then a smaller, roof mount to offset just electrical expenses from processing equipment. So just some of those examples. Jumping to residential, you could have an on-farm system that's for residential use. You live on the farm. There's similar benefits as commercial systems, for farm businesses, except that you're just powering your personal residence. So you're still going to be eligible for some of the government incentives, tax benefits, your reduced energy cost, that energy independence, resiliency, especially if you do pair with some type of storage. You would be eligible for that 30% federal tax credit. However, since it's not for business purposes, you wouldn't be able to add in that REAP grant or that REAP application. So one of the challenges, or some of the challenges with residential system is having the roof space or ground space, right? If it's competing for farmland, best direction for most production to put your system on a roof is going to be south facing. East and west are also good, but you really want to avoid placing them on that north side if you can. If your roof isn't ideal due to shading or orientation, you can always do a ground mounted system. They are generally a little more expensive just due to the steel and increased distances to, maybe your electric panel. And also trenching can get a little expensive. So, similar to commercial and on-farm business applications, you also want to be aware of your utilities rules when it comes to overproduction. So since you're not going to be using all your energy produced by your solar system immediately, some of that is going to have to go back to the utility unless you have a battery. Some utilities will credit this overproduction, and they'll let you use that for free at a later time. Other utilities will just buy it back at a much lower rate if they buy it back at all. So knowing your utilities rules can really help understand, the savings and how much you can possibly offset, or cancel from your electric bill. And like I mentioned, batteries can be utilized in situations to help in some of these utilities that don't buy it back, not just for backup power. And with that 30% tax credit for residential or any tax credit, batteries can be included in that. REAP application, they can be included in that as well. It's just like I said, with REAP, it kind of hurts your payback period and your overall score. Few examples, residential, just how they model, looking at that north side of that roof, kind of the darker areas. Yellow is going to be south facing. That's going to be ideal. But, once if you meet with one of these universities that I mentioned earlier, some solar companies, they'll model that for you. But just keep that in mind when you are looking at your designs. Just a lot of information I just covered. This is just an easy way to look at, to kind of compare the different scales, different incentives. I'm going to come back to this. I did want to cover an even more complex one, and that's the tax credit. It is, possibly one of the more lucrative ones if you can qualify. So, Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, was passed in 2022. Provides federal tax credits for the installation of solar. Like I said, for residential, it's a one-time credit of 30% of the installed system cost. So how much, really varies depending on who's applying. Residential, it's 30%. If you're a business, there are these extra add-ons. So if you look in that clean energy layer cake, you've got your base rate of 30%. But if you're located in, an energy community, or your solar company is buying domestically produced panels, or a low-income building project or an area, there are all these tax credits that can actually be added to that 30%. And also, this for business use can be added on to that 50% REAP grant. So even if you don't get any of those adders for your business, that 30% tax credit and that 50% REAP grant could potentially cover at least 80% of the cost. So that comes back to financing and all that, getting almost the whole thing covered, but then it's like, that's not going to come to you until after the project is completed, right? So if you are a tax-exempt entity, maybe you have a nonprofit, you're a local state government, co-op, there is a direct pay provision. So this tax credit, you don't have to have any tax liability. They're just going to write you a check. In a regular for-profit business, that is going to be one of the challenges. And it's not just for small businesses, but many homeowners, is fully taking advantage of these tax credits, since it is a non-refundable tax credit, meaning it'll only reduce your tax liability to zero. So if any unused credits that you can't use in 1 year will roll over to the next year. So it's not like you don't lose them, or you'll lose them, but it might take multiple years to take advantage of the whole amount. So there are a lot of producers who don't pay many taxes because they're operating, on small margins. So tax benefits could be hard to realize. Definitely recommend speaking with a tax advisor, especially if you've got, even 30%, maybe even 50% of that is coming to you in the form of a tax credit. In the Inflation Reduction Act, they did set up a provision to transfer these tax credits. It has created a marketplace where investors are starting to buy and sell, but usually they're working with much larger utility community scale systems where tax credits are in the millions of dollars. So it's a very new space. Everything's moving very quickly. So this is something that we're watching, but it is something definitely to keep in mind. And last thing, for businesses, this modified accelerated cost recovery system, also known as bonus depreciation, is also very lucrative, allows farmers to deduct a large percentage of that solar asset cost over a 5-year period through annual depreciation deductions on your tax return. So definitely, again, talk to a tax advisor. But this is a great example. This was a pretty big system for a irrigation pivot, so a lot of energy use. But if you look at it, that 580,000, 50% of it went to the REAP grant, 40% because they qualified for that domestically used produced solar. 40% of that was the tax credit, and then the rest was that bonus depreciation. So really it was, paying, or at least recovering less than what you actually paid. So definitely beneficial. And there are some local government and utility rebates and additional incentives that could be applicable in your area. So definitely reach out to your utility, your city. In Texas, property tax code allows for an exemption of 100% of the appraised property value increase. So just because you get solar, it adds value to your property. You're not going to get taxed a higher property tax because of it. So before I jump to that summary, I think Sarah mentioned it earlier, but we released a Texas Solar Survey to gain insight and attitudes towards solar on farmland here in Texas, from on-farm solar behind the meter to off-farm leasing. We'd love your feedback. If you can use that QR code or follow that link. We should post it here later as well. Should take between 10 to 15 minutes, and we'd be giving $50 Visa cards to randomly selected respondents. So thanks again, and love to answer any questions that you might have.
Wow, that was amazing. Thank you so much, Garrett, and Sarah for the presentation. I think we have a bunch of questions already in the chat, and some of them are pretty simple. But let's start from the top. Let's start from the top. So, Charles Stewart asked. He asked a question regarding the power. He said, "Is the power generated kilowatt or megawatt per hour per day?" Can you guys clarify that for us by any chance?
Yeah, so most of these are listed in DC. So they'll say like 5 megawatts DC, which is like direct current. That's got to get converted over to AC power, so alternating current. So to basically be used, if it's for off-farm use, sometimes they leave it in that DC power to transfer it out in those high voltage or even ramp it up at these substations. But if you're looking at it for, like, let's say you are interested in getting solar, whether it's on farm or offsetting your usage, looking at your utility bill, that is going to be in kilowatt hours. So that's how many kilowatts per hour, basically. But the actual system is just the sizing, just kilowatts. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question or not, but.
I think it does. And Charles, please put in the chat if it does. I know I didn't mention this to you guys, but my first job was actually a photovoltaic designer right out of college. So I have an electrical engineering. So I love this conversation, and I do understand from DC is just pretty much pure power, but when it's converted to AC, that's when they add the per minute or per hour of usage going forward. So yes, yes, yes. We have another question in the chat, and this came from Made Garner. He asked if you guys are familiar with a solar project in Houston, Sunnyside, Texas. No? All right, Made, but they're not familiar, but we should probably check that out. We should probably check that out. Also, to our guests, I know you guys have been seeing links on the chat. Feel free to save that. Those links will also be posted along with this presentation on our YouTube channel as well. So you'll be able to view these slides back to back to back, as well as review the links will also be in the description of the YouTube channel. So we have people coming in. Let me check. All right, let's see. Oh, sweet. Michael Tober, he said, what are the most cost-efficient options for solar shingles? Garrett, Sarah?
Yeah, so that's another option. With generally solar, putting it on the roof is going to be your most cost effective, right? They have racking systems. Solar shingles, I think, is going to have to depend on the age of your roof because they do replace that section of your roof. I'm not the most familiar with them. I know in my residential time when I was working in the solar industry, we always just had a racking system that the panels would sit on top. That way, like if, insurance does cover hail damage, if your roof is damaged, going to cover that as well, but it's just less of a intensive process of probably uninstalling and reinstalling those. But I'm not too familiar of all the difficulties or challenges of shingles, solar shingles.
Okay, okay. We have another question. And Michael, please let us know if we kind of answer your questions to the best of our ability. If not, like I said, the resources that Sarah shared in the chat, I'm sure some of those organizations can even answer them further for you. We have another question from Francisco. He says, my family owns a USDA meat processing facility with slaughter. We have a large roof. Does this program include those kinds of facilities?
Absolutely. That's like an ideal REAP project.
Awesome, awesome. Francisco? Yes,
Sorry, I
Sarah.
was just going to say the USDA Office of Rural Development has offices sprinkled around Texas. So we'd be happy to talk to you more and send you more information about those resources that we mentioned that will help people fill out the REAP applications. But connecting directly with your USDA Rural Development Office, they can also help you think about REAP for your operation and what the steps might be. And Garrett mentioned that there are some solar developers that will actually complete the application for you, or at least help walk you through step by step on how to do that. So yeah, that's an absolutely an ideal REAP kind of scenario, I would think.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the response, Sarah. And Francisco, I hope that answered your question as well. If not, please feel free to share a follow-up question. We have another question from Brent. And Brent says, ooh, we have questions coming in, y'all. We are going through these. How much time is needed to 100? Brent, please correct me if I'm saying this wrong. How much time is needed to, I guess, power a 100-acre operation? I don't know, Brent, if you could ask that question again, Brent, I just think they have a typo somewhere and I'm just reading it verbatim. But I'll go back to you, Brent. Charles asked a follow-up questions, wanted to understand the difference in powering per example. Okay, he was asking that. May says, thanks. I can drop a link in Sunnyside Solar Project in Houston. If interested, please drop it made. Brent responded. He said, how much time is needed to start a 100-acre operation? That's what he was asking.
So for big projects like behind the meter, that's when I showed that graph earlier from residential going up to utility scale. As you get bigger and bigger, there's going to be a lot more steps that you've got to take. And I think for landowners that are doing utility scale solar projects, there's like 600 different like check boxes that they've got to do to be granted interconnection permission through ERCOT. So it is a very long process. One of the reasons for the build out in Texas is it is actually a little bit easier to connect to the ERCOT grid than a lot of other areas around the country. However, it's still going to take years, maybe 2 to 4 years to get all the permissions, and all the studies and things that they need to get in line, to make sure that they're actually able to connect. So that was, we talked about that solar leasing guide earlier. That's the thing with a lot of landowners. They'll sign a letter of intent, and they can't really opt out, but the developer then has kind of a due diligence period where they can spend, it might be a year or a year and a half or 2 years, where if all those check boxes continue to get checked, they can then say, all right, yep, this is going, we're going to enter into the full contract. But at any point, if one of those check boxes doesn't check out, then the developer can walk away. So it is a quite complicated process, especially the larger scale that you get.
Interesting. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for the answer, Garrett.
And
We have yes, Sarah.
oh, I was just going to add to that I have heard several examples of people that might have 50 or 100 acres or that's a lot of land to me, but a smaller amount on the scale of a solar developer, work with their neighbors to get together multiple landowners that are interested in having solar on their properties, and if they become like a larger entity by that like aggregate action, then they might be more likely to attract a solar developer.
That's a good point. And I think that'll be beneficial to our farmers who neighbors are also farmers as well. They can probably have that kind of that mini community of sorts to create that effort. We have more questions. We have a question that came in the Q&A. This came from Kim Speed. She says, are there particular solar residential qualifications that we should ensure the company has? Are there ways to find the best residential solar companies for the roof? Is best to use a metal roof or shingle roof for solar? That's her question. So I guess it's a three-part question. I can repeat each one and you guys. So the first question was, are there particular solar residential qualifications that we should ensure the company has?
Yeah, so usually the electricians will have like a NABCEP certification, NABCEP, NABCEP certification. The answer to that second question is I would definitely get multiple. Don't go with the first solar company that knocks on your door that reaches out. You want to look at multiple solar companies, compare the differences, maybe what they have to offer, warranties on all the equipment, and make sure that you're comparing, all those different qualities as well. As far as the roof, typically solar companies will have a roof penetration warranty. Of course, if it's a metal roof, they shouldn't penetrate anyway. They've got these metal seams on the racking. The racking will basically connect onto those seams, and they'll just sit on that, and they won't even have to penetrate. For a shingle roof, typically they will have to penetrate, but usually solar companies will do some kind of warranty, whether it's 10 years or 20-year warranty on that penetration. So if anything happens during that time, they'll be liable to come out and fix that. So that's definitely looking at those different solar companies and comparing the different warranties and maybe how long they've been in business and things like that as well. Because high interest rates, so a lot of solar companies, residential space, it's slowed down some. So just to keep in mind that. whenever looking.
Okay. Thank you so much, Garrett. Kim, I hope that answered your question. We have another question. This came from Julia Brown. Are there dangers involved in solar farming? If so, what are they? And I think she's referring to the agrivoltaic farming process.
Would say if you are like a grazer that is going to be on one of these sites, even if you want to go visit one, there are a lot of specific things that you have to do, whether it's wearing fire protective vests, other things, hard hats, being on site. I mean, it is a power plant, so there are certain precautions that the developer or the company will make you go through to make sure that you are being safe, and as a solar grazer that you're keeping in mind when you're working, because some of these solar grazers also not only run sheep, they also have like a hybrid mowing service where maybe they'll mow a little bit on areas maybe the sheep didn't get, so they can hit some of those requirements I was talking about from insurance about having it a certain height. So they've got to navigate that on this site as well. So I would say those dangers. And for us, it's more about if it's farmland, protecting the soil health, during that construction phase and decommissioning, and even during the life, using solar grazing to keep that soil health in good condition to make sure that farming is able to continue in the future.
Okay, good. We have another question. And Phil, Arlena, if y'all want to jump in and take any of these, because these questions are coming in fast. But yeah, so we have another question, and this is from Tina. Tina says, I have a value-added agritourism idea, which I currently have a 300 square foot off-grid cabin with a 300 kilowatt array with batteries and ECC on 15 acres. I would like to expand this idea. Would AFT or partnerships be able to evaluate what I have available and potential for expansion? It's a great question. And if you want me to repeat the question, I know but pretty much she's saying that she already has a 300 kilowatt array on her property, and she would like to expand this even further. And she wants to know if there are partnerships or AFT can help her evaluate what she has to potentially expand. She says my residence and farm barn utilize 2 of the 15 acres, pretty much. So she has 13 acres to.
That's awesome, Tina. I love that some of the people that are here are already utilizing solar. And also the agritourism piece, that's like such a critical component to so many farmers being successful, being able to diversify your income. So kudos to you on already being 2 steps into that diversification process. But I would just say that what you're asking, that is Garrett's job. We're always happy to talk with folks in more detail about what your specific situation is. And if we don't have the answer, we probably have the connections and the relationships to try to get you the answer or point you in the right direction so that you can dream big and move forward. I think that, don't hesitate at all to reach anybody on the webinar. Don't hesitate to reach out to either of us or both of us directly and start a more in-depth conversation about your situation. We are more than available and happy to have those conversations.
And I don't know, Garrett, I was just going to say, Tina will be sharing their contact information with everyone in the call as well. Garrett, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, absolutely. Everything Sarah said. Sorry, the initial question, my baby was crying and I'm like kind of thrown off. Thrown off. So
I know your daddy duties. You were like, ooh.
I hear some screaming in the background, but no, absolutely. Yeah, that's awesome. Definitely reach out. Like Sarah said, that's my job to talk to people, their experiences, what resources, connections that we have. And if it's nothing we can do, we can definitely, guide you in the right direction.
Great. Tina, please reach out to Garrett or Sarah. They can follow up with you and answer any questions you have. Made responded back. He did send a link to YouTube. I will also share this on the description of of our YouTube page to kind of have as a resource. But he says Sunnyside Solar is the largest solar installation in the nation. Look in Houston, Texas. Wow. Thanks for the information, Made. We definitely will be sharing this with our listeners as well, just so that folks can follow up and learn more about it. He says he has a 300-watt solar panel on his truck as he writes this. So he is also very interested in expanding his solar, I guess, enterprise or installation as well. Let's see. Jay Jones, he says, I own a community education farm in Dallas and I want to incorporate solar. Where do I start implementing?
So that's going to depend, I guess, what scale. We can always chat and see, how close she is to maybe an area. If it's an interconnection, if she's in an area that might be something for maybe a community scale or utility scale. But if it's something you just want to do on farm, if you've got any kind of electric usage to offset, then putting up some type of solar system, to offset that usage. But I guess kind of figuring out what your goals are, what you're trying to do. Is it lease income? Is it just offsetting your expense that you've already got, and then figuring out, taking the next step of, is it solar companies, starting to look at, what kind of design options and things like that. But definitely, I'd love to talk to you as well and see anything that we can do to help.
As a follow-up, Jay Jones says, I have 200 panels. They have 200 panels. So they already have, I guess, some of the equipment ready to go. They just want to know how best they could take that up, incorporate that into their or implement it as well. We also have another follow-up from Brent. If you recall, Brent was the individual that, and I have to recall this as well. Brent was he was the individual that had that how much he was asking about how much time he's needed to start a 100-acre operation, and he stated that, and I don't know if Brent's he or she, but they stated that if you start with a 20-acre ranch, what will be the optimal turnaround time, and could the ranch operation expand later? So I guess he reduced the goal amount to 20 acres and wanted to know what the optimal time to get that up and running, and of course, expand afterwards.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, you can always expand with solar, whether it's on your house, it's on your farm, and get bigger as time goes by. 20 acres, again, if this is for on-farm use, what's really going to matter is, how much electricity are you using that you need to cancel out or offset. So when you are applying, for REAP, for even looking at solar companies, they're always going to ask you, what is your usage? And if you don't have, maybe you've only been there for a couple months, or maybe, you're in the process of buying some electric vehicles, or maybe some processing equipment or refrigeration equipment, and those needs might go up. They can estimate that for you. But I think it's just figuring out, like, first, what is it that I'm trying to offset? How much electricity, what are the rules in my utility as far as buyback? Are they crediting me? Then maybe I can get a bigger system to offset more of it. If they're not buying anything back, maybe I need a smaller system, or maybe I need batteries to incorporate in. But I think it's just asking those questions and seeing, what is it I'm trying to do, or what is it I'm trying to cancel out, or am I trying to get income, and like I said, behind the meter systems are more for usage on site, right? And if you're looking into those bigger systems, then it's all going to come down to where are you located in Texas. near a transmission grid, and not just a transmission grid, but one of those substations or those interconnection points that if you do partner with a developer and get a lease payment, they can connect into that grid fairly easily and cheaply. So
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for the question. Arlena?
Yes, forgive me if I have no knowledge, like Uche, no background, but it sounds like no matter what you choose and how large, there is some type of use with the grid. So how do you use solar where there is just completely off grid? There is no power source for a small space. So for a small farmer in an urban space, they wouldn't be eligible for REAP. Um, how would they go about using the solar panels for operations on that small space?
yeah, I mean that's a great question. There are off-grid opportunities. You know, there's after Hurricane, I know somebody said they were from Houston, but Hurricane Beryl that came through, there were a lot of outages. And people are looking more into what's called microgrids. So it's like a combination of solar, batteries, and like gas generators. So when you're not relying on solar, you're pulling from your, whether it's your batteries, and then if those are running out, you're recharging or pulling from your generator as well. So there are companies out there that can design systems like that. I would say most, solar companies are just going to be battery and solar, right? Or maybe just solar. But I think as the market is maturing and more people are requesting batteries, and as batteries come down, a lot of those type of situations, like you just said, as far as off-grid or not even needing the utility, is becoming more common. I would kind of defer back to maybe your utility too, just because sometimes you have to get that permission from your utility to even install solar. So whether you're not going to send it back or not, they might not permit it, and of course you can always maybe do it under the table, but then if there's something happens, then who's liable for that? But yeah, I know some co-ops, allow that, others don't, just because the technology is out there, right? Like you can even change, your inverters to be like, I don't want to send any electricity back out to the grid, and they won't. But it's just convincing a co-op that you're not going to do it, or, another, city utility or whoever. So, but it's definitely doable. I would say it's a little more expensive than probably just your solar options only.
Well, we are at the 7:28 mark. And yeah, Phil, you want to cap us off?
Oh yeah, I don't think I've uh been that quiet for that long in a long time. So thank you for doing all the heavy lifting there, Mr. Uche. No, thank you so much, everyone. We will be sending this recording out along with Uche. We'll make sure we have everyone's Garrett and Sarah's contact info for those of you who want to follow up. Thank you so much for giving us your time tonight. We always appreciate that. And special thanks to Garrett and Sarah, as well as Uche and Arlena and our team behind the scenes. And until next time, be the exception. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank y'all so much for having us.